Well, greetings in Jesus' name. Am I okay? We're all right? Okay? All right. Well, greetings in Jesus' name. It is a joy and an honor to be with you here on your Faith Promise Sunday. I know, first of all, let me tell you, Penny sends her apology. And let me tell you, she is passionate about children's ministries, and it is... she was in dire straits at the hotel saying, I just want to go so bad, but she couldn't speak and because of her throat and her voice. So appreciate your prayers, but we arrived back in Ohio just a week ago, last week, and so we got welcomed with Ohio weather, and you know how that goes, right? And so we're dealing with stuff that we don't normally deal with when we're in the heart of Africa. But it is a joy and an honor to be with you and excited to share what God is doing. How many of you believe that with God all things are possible? Do you believe that? I do. I believe that with God all things are possible. And you know, we were to speak at a large Nazarene church, and they asked us to speak, and we thought we were going to talk about Zambia and that. And the pastor sends me an email about 2 weeks, 3 weeks before, and he says, "Hey, Gary, the Sunday you're coming, we're doing a series on Jonah. We would like for you to speak on Jonah chapter 2. I thought I was going to speak about Zambia and the Africa Southeast field, and I'm thinking, what is this? And I got to looking at Jonah chapter 2, and if you know the story of Jonah, I'm like, what am I going to do with this? But then the Lord said to me, Gary, Jonah is a mission story. And if you know the story of Jonah in chapter 2, he's not in very good shape. He's running from God, thrown into the sea. He's in the belly of a fish. And what you find in chapter 2 is these words, which is his prayer. In my distress I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From the depths of the grave I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You hurled me into the deep, into the very heart of the seas, and the currents swirled about me. All your waves and breakers swept over me. I said, I've been banished from your sight, yet I will look again toward your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me. The deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. Sounds like a great place to pray right there, don't you think? And if you keep reading his prayer, he says, to the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever. But you brought my life up from the pit, O Lord my God. And his prayer continues. As I look at that prayer, it reminds me of a couple things when we're talking about missions. Number one is this, is that God is everywhere. He is in the heart of Africa, I'm sure, in places that you've never knew existed, people that you didn't even know what their names were. Maybe you can't even pronounce them. But you know what? God is everywhere, even in the belly of a fish. And the second thing I've learned from that is that no matter where you are, God can hear your prayer. Isn't that good news? Aren't you excited? The Zambia South District Superintendent, he called me into his office one day. He said, Reverend Sidle, look at this letter I just received. And I went into his office and he handed me this letter. As I began to read this letter, it was handwritten in English. And at the very beginning, at the top of the letter there, it said, I hope I'm writing to the right people. Isn't that a great way to start a letter? Do you guys write letters or emails that way? Well, I hope I'm writing to the right people. And I'm like, and as I begin to read this letter, this gentleman who is writing, he says, I'm reading this magazine about this holiness church. Oh, I hope you're the right people, because if you're the right people, my village, my people need to hear this message. Oh, I hope you're the right people. He kept saying that over and over in the letter. I hope you're the right people. And I asked the district superintendent, I said, well, where did this letter come from? I said, do we have churches in that area? And he goes, oh, no, we have no churches in that region, in that area. And as I kept reading that letter, he kept saying, oh, I hope you're the right people. Please come to my village. And then at the very bottom of the letter, his last sentence was, the magazine that I'm reading from is called Herald of Holiness. Now, if you've been in the Church of the Nazarene a long time, you know the Herald of Holiness is a magazine that we put out. They call it Holiness Today now, I think. But this is years ago that magazine was put out. But somehow, a magazine that the church doesn't normally send to Africa, okay? Somehow this magazine made its way all the way out to a remote village in eastern Zambia. And then a man writes a letter. I hope I'm writing to the right people. And somehow this letter made its way all the way back to the proper place at the district superintendent's office. Can anyone explain to me how this happens? Can you? With God, all things are possible. Even faith promise. And so I kind of forgot about this letter, and as she was sharing, I'm the field education coordinator for the Africa Southeast Field. That's Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe. Right now we have over 400 pastors in the training program. We've been educated more than probably 2,000 over the 22 years I've been there. And we've started, like just in Zambia alone, we went from about 75 churches when we got there to now over 600 churches. And we're continuing to grow. And so you know what? I know firsthand, and I know maybe you too, that with God all things are possible. But I had forgotten about that letter. And of course, I teach extension classes, and I had a student coming through our classes. His name was Francis. And Francis had a call to be a pastor and that. And one day he calls me up on the cell phone. You know, we have cell phones. At that time, we only had cell coverage in the cities. And so he called me up and he says, Reverend Sidle, I need to see you right away. Can I come to see you? And I said, well, yeah, Francis, come. So he came to my house, and we went back to my office there at the mission house. And he began to share with me. He says, hey, Reverend Sidle, I just wanted to let you know that God is telling me to go to eastern Zambia. And I said, well, that's amazing, Francis. That's wonderful. I said, well, when do you think you will go? He says, I'm going next week. And I said, well, you're going to go check things out or whatever? He goes, no, I'm taking my family. God's telling me to go now. I'm taking my family. We're packing, and we're going next week. And I'm like, Francis, wait a minute. You haven't finished your course of study. And I'm thinking through all the logistics and all that. He says, no, Reverend Sidle, the reason I've come to see you is because I'm afraid to go. He says, would you pray for me right now that God would give me courage to go? Because we all know that the biggest hindrance to the gospel of Jesus Christ is one word. One word. Fear. Fear. We're afraid to cross the street to tell somebody about Jesus. We're afraid to say something to that coworker. We're afraid, sometimes to even think about faith promise. Well, what should I give? And fear comes in about this and that. And he said, and I remember that day I prayed with Francis. I put my hands on him, and I prayed that God would give him courage to go. And as I was praying for him, I felt a little guilty because I'm thinking, would I take my family and go? Because see, where he was going to go, there was no church. There was no house, no parsonage, no salary, nothing. And yet he was going to take his family, his few belongings that he had, and get on a bus and go. I remember I prayed with him that God would give him courage. That next week, they were gone. A month went by, we heard nothing from Francis. 3 months went by. I kept asking the district superintendent, I said, have you heard from Francis? What's going on? He goes, we haven't heard anything. We don't know where they're at. 6 months went by. 9 months went by. I was concerned. Finally, the district superintendent, he calls me up. He says, Reverend Sidle, I want you to know that Francis is sitting here in my office and he wants to see you. I said, he's here in Lusaka. Lusaka is the capital city. And I said, he's here? And he goes, yeah. I said, I'll be right over. I remember I went over to the office there. The district superintendent went in. There's Francis. He was in a suit and tie, all looking nice and everything. And I said, you know when you haven't seen somebody for a while, you haven't heard from them, I mean, what's the first thing you do? You can't do this. I mean, we've been worried about you. We haven't heard from you, whatever. He goes, oh, Reverend Sidle. He goes, don't worry. He goes, I just came back to tell you that we have 9 new Nazarene churches out there. He says, we got people to baptize. We got people that want to join the church. He goes, we need you to come and train our leaders and all that. He says, will you come? I'm like, wow, 9 churches? In less than a year, he got the courage to go. And I remember a couple weeks before we were to go out there, I remember I called Francis. We got him a cell phone. I said, you got to keep in touch with us. And called him up. I said, Francis, we're excited to come. And he said, Reverend Sidle, I forgot to tell you that the Sunday you're going to be here, you'll preach at one of our new churches. And I said, that's great, Francis. He goes, you'll be preaching at Magazine Church of the Nazarene. I said, what's the name of the church? Magazine Church of the Nazarene? I mean, where we're at in Africa, our churches are called, Kabalonga, Chikumbi, Chipongwe, African names. Magazine Church of the Nazarene. I remember as I got to thinking where he went, I started remembering that letter that years before had come. That man praying somebody would bring that message. And I remember, I'm thinking, what could this be? And I remember when I got there, we got out, and there was a delegation there meeting us as we arrived, because we were arriving for all these new churches. And one of the first questions I asked Francis, I said, I just kind of ask you. I said, where am I preaching at Sunday morning? He says, you're going to preach at our new church out here. It's Magazine Church of the Nazarene. I said, Francis, why do you call it Magazine? And he said, well, Reverend Sidle, we used to be a British colony. And I said, yes. And he says, well, the British had a fort out in this area. And I said, Fort Smith. Yes, okay, I've heard that. He says, well, outside the fort area there, they had an ammunition factory that made magazines for guns. So that area out there is known as Magazine. And I thought, well, there goes my connection to my letter. But not really. Because, see, God knew that there was a letter, a magazine that would go to a remote village. God knew that the man would write a letter, and he would send that letter one day asking for the church to come. God had a plan that one day someone by the name of Francis would come along and said, just give me the courage to go. And he went. And I want you to know, Francis now has over 20 churches in that area. He's heading a Jesus Film team, and even as we speak right now, he's planting more churches. Because Francis believes that with God, all things are possible. Do you believe that? It's amazing I chair district assemblies because our GSs are not able to travel around the world so much as the church has grown. And as I was chairing the Laupula Northern, which is way up near the Congo, and we have a district up there that started with just a handful of churches. I think the last report, they now have over about 170 churches on this new district, okay? And I remember on the report that was given, the DS was upset with the people. He was upset. I'm chairing the assembly, and he gets up to give his speech. He goes, I want you to know we have failed. We have failed to do our job. We've got to do better now. We've got to do better. He says, you know what he said? He says, we were supposed to plant 60 churches this last year, and we only planted 48. And he was unhappy. He said, we were supposed to bring in 5,000 new members this last year, and we only brought in 3,500. We've got to do better. And I'm sitting there going, what? I mean, this is crazy. 48 new churches, 3,500 new members in just the last year. Because our Laupula district in northern Zambia believes that with God, all things are possible. I could keep sharing with you more and more how God is working in amazing ways. I have seen God just do amazing things. And I've said to many people, they say, Gary, what is it like being in the heart of Africa? I said, it's like a Book of Acts movement. I said, we can't keep up with the growth. We have 20 Jesus Film teams alone in Zambia that are church planting right now. Sometimes I could just leave Lusaka, and by the time I've come back, like on a trip to the U.S., sometimes I would come back here for 3 or 4 months, and when I would get back, they'd come to me and say, Reverend Sidle, I want you to know we have 15 new churches now in this area. There are churches right now in Africa we don't even know exist yet. I remember we were at a meeting one time, and one of the other missionaries from Namibia came to me and says, hey, Gary, I need to talk to you. Our Namibians have went up along the border of Angola and Zambia. They said they've started 25 new churches up there. I remember I said to Mike Shalley, I said, Mike, I said, that's your churches because we don't have any roads to that area from where we are. That is what God is doing. And you know what? As I'm sharing with you, I hope you're getting excited because this is what you are a part of. When you pray and when you give, this is what God is doing through all of us. I said it yesterday at the end of my convention. I say it again today. It's teamwork. We could not do what we do without your prayers and your support. And that's not an overstatement or some statement just to make because I'm at a faith promise service. This is the truth and a fact. I can tell you about cars that broke down in the middle of nowhere. And just a matter of 100 yards away is a mechanic. Can you explain that to me? And especially when you have a stabilizer pulley that blows apart, rubber's all over, belts are all over, the pulleys are in pieces. If you're a mechanic, you know what I'm talking about. And I'm in the middle of nowhere, and within 2 hours, I'm on the road driving with my youth and mission team. Because this mechanic knew how to take a hacksaw blade and a big inner tube tire, and he rebuilt the pulley that went on the van. In 2 hours, I was back on the road. And that's all because that was happening, I said, somebody's praying. Somebody's praying for us. Because with God, all things are possible. I remember one of the first things that I was asked to do was to take a Jesus Film team into a remote area. And I was really excited because I had been a pastor in West Virginia and I'd heard all these reports coming for Jesus Film, thousands of viewers and all this stuff and millions of that. And I'm sure maybe you've heard these stories. And I thought, I get to see this firsthand now. And so we loaded up the equipment, took off on a journey that started at 5 o'clock in the morning, and we arrived at 6 p.m., and the entire day we were driving on roads that your mind could not even fathom. I didn't know that you could drive in ditches so long, because it was better to drive in the ditch many times than to even be on whatever they called it. And so you know what? We made our way all day. I remember I was sick. I had a headache, everything, because I was the only one that had driver's license. So everybody else was riding. The Jesus Film team was in the back, and I was just totally and physically exhausted. But that next morning we got up, went and got a permit from the police, and we took off about 3 o'clock in the afternoon to a soccer field. Because everybody knows that the number one sport in Africa is football. Yeah, okay. Football, we call it. Anyway, so we went out to this soccer field, and there's nobody there. No advertising, no pre-planning or anything like that. We show up at this soccer field, and we start setting up the Jesus Film equipment. And within 30 minutes, we already had over 200 people on the soccer field. By 6 p.m., when it got dark enough to start that Jesus Film showing, that entire soccer field from goalpost to goalpost was packed. And I'm looking this whole thing over and I'm thinking, you know what? There was no advertising, no radio announcements, no newspaper or anything. I mean, we just showed up and within hours, thousands are there. And I'm like, well, this is amazing. So I went to the team leader and I said to the team leader, I said, Reverend Zulu, I said, this is amazing. I said, I know you have to fill out those reports. I said, how do you count all these people? And he looked at me and he says, well, tonight, Reverend Sidle, you're counting. I said, no, I want to know how you're doing. He goes, no, grab your flashlight, let's go. And there we went walking around this soccer field. And the only light in the entire area was the dim light coming off the screen. And of course, the screen's in the middle of the field, and you could watch it from either side. And we're walking around, and I'm thinking, I mean, the people are packed in like sardines in a can as they're pressed in watching this Jesus film. And I'm like, okay, 300, 500, I don't know, to 500,000. I don't know. As we're walking around, all of a sudden as we're walking around this soccer field, there was this tall grass that was around the soccer field. If you've been to Africa, the grass grows really high. And all of a sudden I heard noises in the grass. And I took my flashlight and began to shine it back through the grass. And this grass all around this field was completely filled with people that was sitting in the grass looking out at the Jesus film. We went down to this end of the soccer field, and there was a row of trees on this end of the soccer field. And as I took my flashlight, you could go up across all those trees, and those trees were completely filled with people who had climbed up so they could see the Jesus film. Went down around to the other end of the soccer field, and I remember there was a row of buildings that was a short distance away from the soccer field. And as I got to looking at those buildings, you could see that the entire roofs of those buildings were completely filled with people who had climbed up onto the roofs so that they could watch the Jesus film. So I asked Reverend Zulu, I said, now, am I supposed to include in the total number the people in the grass and up in the trees and over on the roofs? I said, because they could hear, because we had these loudspeakers, and they could hear. And he says, oh no, Reverend Sidle, let's just count the people right here on the soccer field. I have to tell you, I never did give him a number. It was impossible. There was just people everywhere. And even as the showing was continuing, more and more people were packing in. But I do know this. At the end of that Jesus film, they gave an invitation to receive Jesus as Lord and Savior. And I can tell you by the hundreds, people were coming down to the center of that screen. The new church plant that we were working on, they had people stationed around the screen with tablets and that, and they were taking contacts and information as the people were coming that I've received Jesus. And it was an amazing thing. That Sunday morning, I had the opportunity to preach at this new church plant, and the place was packed. And it was exciting. There was electric in the air, and I had the opportunity to preach. And I remember I gave an invitation at the end, and people were praying all over the place. And I remember I was praying with people on this side, and when I came back, I kind of came back and sat down in a chair in the corner. And as I did, back over on this side, the Jesus Film team, the district superintendent who had traveled with us, they were over here around this woman, and they were praying, and it was getting louder and more intense. You could tell something was going on. And as I was seated over here, pretty soon the district superintendent, he jumps up and he runs over to me and he says, Reverend Sidle, do you know what's going on over here? I said, no, I'm not sure. And as he started to tell me, this woman, she jumps up from prayer. You can see tears coming down her cheeks. And in her language of Chichewa, she began to tell the people that she was a devil worshiper. And she said the devil told her to specifically come to this location and go and do what she could to destroy this church. Because there's this new holiness church. There's this new church coming into this area, and you don't want this. Go destroy it. And she came and she says, this is what I came to do, was to try to find a way to destroy this church. But God had a different plan. Because that morning, that woman met Jesus. And she received Jesus. As a matter of fact, 6 months later, we went back to do some follow-up training with this new church. And I remember as I walked into the place they were meeting, guess who was up front as the song worship leader? I said, Pastor, isn't that the devil worship lady up there leading the service? He goes, oh, let me tell you about this woman. And this was his exact words to me. He says, Reverend Sidle, this woman is on fire for Jesus. He says, this entire region has heard the story how God has changed a devil worshiper into a worshiper of the one true God. He says, and every Sunday now, new people are coming into this church because of her testimony. And if you were there that Sunday morning as she was leading the worship, you may have heard her leading a song. goes something like this. It's sung all over Africa in all the different languages. We have over 2,000 languages. You'll hear these songs, but here's what it would sound like in English. There's no one like Jesus. There's no one like Jesus. There's no one like Jesus. There's no one like him. Okay, very simple. Let's try singing it together, okay? There's no one like Jesus. There's no one like Jesus. There's no one like Jesus. There's no one like him. You know what? Aren't you getting excited? You're starting to sound like Zambians right now. Okay, but we have a problem. You don't look like Zambians. And you know why? Because usually when we're singing, we're standing and clapping our hands. So let's try it. See if you can stand and clap your hands. There's no one like Jesus. There's no one like Jesus. There's no one like Jesus. There's no one like... You know what? You're all doing so well. Let's go to the second part of that song where we dance and move like we do in Africa. What are you laughing at? This is what we do. The second part goes like this. It says, I'm walking, here, there. I'm searching, here, there. I turn around, here, there. There's no one like him. Why do I see doubt on some of your faces? You know, church is a place of encouragement. Look to somebody next to you and say, I know you can do this song. I know you can do this song. Okay, so I'm walking, here, there. It says I'm searching. Now, when we're doing it, make sure you check under your tables, check under your jackets, whatever. We check everywhere because there's no one like Jesus. And then I turn around, here, there. There's no one like him, okay? So there's no one like Jesus. There's no one like Jesus. There's no one like Jesus. There's no one like him. I'm walking, here, there. I'm searching, here, there. I turn around, here, there. There's no one like him. Well, give yourself a hand. I can see that the worship people are taking notes here, right? That's all right. You may be seated. Well, you know what? We serve an amazing God, and I do believe that with God, all things are possible. And really, that's what Faith Promise is all about. It's not the faith that we can do something. It's the faith that God can use us and work through us. And yes, it may seem like a little bit that we give, but it's a lot. Scripture talks about even the woman who gave the small amount gave more than anyone else. So you know what? Trust the Lord and believe that with God all things are possible. Even when it comes to say, Lord, how do you want me to give? How do you want me to be a part of this? Because I want to tell you again, we could not do what we do on the mission field without your prayers and your support. And I hope today I've shared just a couple quick stories to let you know that amazing things are happening. We hear a lot of bad news in the world. But there's also a lot of good news of what God is doing. We're going to close with a video, and as we watch this video, it shares some of the ministries and things that we're doing and we're involved with in the heart of Africa. And as we watch this video, be careful. I want you to look for the photo at the very end. You may be surprised when you come to the end. God bless as you watch this video.